Stealth games used to be one of my all-time favorite genres of video game, but nowadays stealth games exist in name alone. They don't really have the same feel that the old school games had. Creeping around in the dark and sneaking up behind enemies just played differently back then. And one of my favorite stealth game franchises was the Splinter Cell series. Unfortunately, Ubisoft abandoned this series for the sake of Assassin's Creed and other more successful franchises. Totally makes sense, I get it. They're supposed to be doing a Splinter Cell remake, but who knows what's gonna happen with that after they already canceled their VR Splinter Cell game. But why am I talking about all of this? Because one of the biggest names in stealth back in the day was the Thief games. More specifically, you'll always hear these old timers talking about Thief Gold. The history of the Thief franchise is very, very muddy. Suffice to say that the OG crew that created this genre-defining video game is no more. The company went bankrupt many, many years ago. Currently, Square Enix is the rights holder of the Thief franchise, but the last time that they ended up making a Thief game was like over a decade ago. So it's safe to say that this franchise is dead, which is a damn shame because this game is phenomenal. Now, I never ended up actually playing through the original Thief. It was only when they moved it to Xbox with Thief Deadly Shadows that I ended up playing through it. And while that game got a lot of slack from old school fans, I actually really enjoyed it. I wasn't really super big into PC gaming back then. And because this was my first time playing a Thief game, I often referred to it as medieval Splinter Cell. The only reason I'm bringing all of this up is I want to get my point across that I have no nostalgic ties to Thief Gold. But this year, I finally forced myself to play through it, and I'm so glad I did. A lot of this game surprisingly holds up today, but it doesn't mean that there aren't still problems. So with this video, I wanted to kind of run you guys through my entire playthrough. If you want to watch me play through the entire game, I'll put a link in the description to my full playthrough on my secondary channel. So before we get started, I just gotta mention this game is old. So old and weird, in fact, that the Steam version is virtually unplayable. I actually had to get this off of GOG, but it's still not perfect. Thankfully, because this is such a beloved video game, it's got a bunch of hotfixes from players. More specifically, T-Fix or Thief Fix. This is mandatory in order to end up playing this game nowadays. So now that we're finally in the game, the first thing that we see is a bunch of scrolling text and then a cutscene. And none of this really makes sense right now. I will say that the dialogue is presented very well though, and it does set up the mission appropriately. We're tasked with breaking into a lord's manor so that we can steal a specific treasure. Immediately as we start the level, you'll notice that the front gate is heavily guarded, so you're incentivized to wander around the compound. Eventually you'll come across a drunk guard, which is easy enough to knock out because he doesn't even care about you. Steal a key and break into the manor via well. You'll overhear some guards and realize just how puke disgusting this game's graphics look. Now, old school graphics don't really bother me, but the main thing that I did start to notice in this level was how confused I got of where the hell I was. There is a map in the game and it does the best job that it can trying to tell you where you are, but for the most part, you're gonna have to use your brain to figure out where you are. I'm not necessarily questioning the level design, it's just because this game is so old and because the graphics are also so old, the level geometry itself has to stay extremely simple, and that's where I started to find a problem just because each area looks so similar and undistinct. But with that said, I slowly got the hang of it, and eventually I ended up grabbing the treasure and the mission immediately ended. Honestly, I really appreciate the fact that you could just yeet out of the level. This is where I'd like to mention that I was actually playing this game on the normal difficulty, which a lot of people consider the easy difficulty, because higher difficulty in this game adds more objectives. So it's actually like a meaningful difficulty bump rather than just inflating health pools or whatever. Point being is if I was playing on expert, I would have had to get the treasure and get out. So moving into the next level, this is as good a time as ever to mention the shop system. What's the point in stealing treasure? So that you can get gold for the next map. So when you end up buying supplies out of the shop, you'll only be able to use those supplies in the level that you're going into. They don't carry into the next level or the next level or the next level. Some people might find this annoying, but personally, because I'm a hoarder in video games, I actually really liked this. It meant I didn't need to hold all of my supplies and instead could just burn through them. But let's move on. The next level kind of sets the stage that this game is not just going to be against humans. humans. There are supernatural elements, and we are literally fighting against the undead. The only way that you can permanently kill them is with holy water. I don't really have much to say about this level in itself, but I do really like the concept because we're essentially sneaking through the mines to break into a prison to help a friend. This is also when the game teaches you that the starting objectives are not necessarily the ending objectives, because the dude that we're tasked with saving actually ends up just saying, yeah, don't bother helping me, bro. Instead, go and do this. Next level gets even weirder as it is a gigantic catacomb full of undead. It's kind of strange how the game just almost immediately ramps up to being like an action game, but if I'm being perfectly honest, I wasn't the biggest fan of this level initially, most of all because of the cave section. Like, a lot of these tunnels look the exact same as other tunnels, and the direct way forward is a little bit unclear. But this is around the time that I started to notice the game had something that I haven't really seen in a lot of games before it. You see, Thief actually has an insane soundtrack, or should I say a soundscape. It's not really music, it's more so ambience. And something that was way ahead of its time is that this game uses that ambience to guide the player to the right area. In the case of this level, we're tasked with stealing some sort of a ancient horn. And as you go deeper into the level and get closer to the main objective, the horn gets louder and louder. So anytime you're lost, you can just kind of listen to the ambience and its intensity to tell how close you are to the main objective. Very cool. Next level opens with a trailing mission. And honestly, I didn't like this one that much. Like, the trailing mission itself was okay, but because the way that this game is designed, like, it's so simple and old, I knew that even if I lost track of these guys, I would still be able to figure out where to go simply because there was only one way to go. It wasn't awful, it just kind of felt pointless. So then we had to break into another mansion, and this part of the level I actually really enjoyed. One thing that I want to bring attention to is the fact that this game offers multiple ways to complete the objective. Like, sneaking into this mansion, there was a ton of different ways you could go about it. I, of course, just ended up going with the tried and true system of sneaking through the watering source and then climbing over the wall. The mansion itself, as usual, sprawling and confusing. But ultimately, I actually really enjoyed this map. Now, this next level was the Thieves Guild, and going into it, I had no idea the history behind this level. Let me just say outright, I hate this map. I think it starts out really cool with you breaking into a rival thieves guild, but ultimately you end up in the sewer and everything looks the same. And it's just stupid. Like, more so than any other level in the game, this feels so samey from screen to screen. Now, what I didn't know is the original game was Thief the Dark Project, and then later was re-released as Thief Gold, which included 3 new maps, one of them being the Thieves Guild. It's pretty crazy that I never played the original, but this map stuck out like a sore thumb and just didn't fit with the rest of the game. So moving on, the next level is the Sword. This is another sneak into the mansion to steal something, but it's also going to get weird. The setup is we're hired by a lady called Victoria to steal the sword from this mansion. There's a lot of traps, and the level itself is very strange. The deeper you go into the mansion, the less normal things are. You start hearing demonic laughter, walls and rooms are flipped upside down, there's plants growing everywhere. It doesn't make any sense. But overall, the objective is very straightforward. Get in, grab the item, get out. This is when the game starts to try and have a story. So it turns out that the mansion we stole the sword from, yeah, the dude who owns that mansion is the one who secretly hired us in the first place to see how good a thief we were. So anyways, with this next level, you're tasked with going through the undead district of the city. There's a lot of enemies and there's a lot of gray. For the most part, I like this area, but there are some stupid parts. The main quest eventually takes you to this cathedral where you overlook some ancient evil item that the old dude wants you to steal. But weirdly enough, you actually don't have any way of entering the cathedral where this weird evil item is yet. For story reasons, we'll get back to this later. The part that I hate about this level is cryptic old game BS. The objective just says something about going into the garden or the courtyard and setting a bunch of torches on fire, when the reality is you have to stand on top of this keyhole thing and shoot a fire arrow at this statue. Hopefully you still have a fire arrow by this point, because otherwise you are soft lock. and then you suddenly have to put like a bunch of statue parts on top of this switch, which also required me to look online because I didn't know there was a button in this game that I could softly drop an item on the ground. I thought I could only throw things. This is also a good time to talk about my least favorite objective in this entire game. Get a certain amount of gold in order to leave the level. In this level in particular, because it's so big and there's just so many little nooks and crannies and secrets, I wouldn't be surprised if most people kind of get stuck on this objective on this map. It can be really disheartening to have every single one of the objectives complete, feel like, oh, I should naturally move on to the next level, but you can't yet because you missed like one tiny little piece of gold hidden in an alley somewhere. But now let's move on to one of my least favorite maps in the entire game, the Mage Towers. This level took me like 2 hours to complete, is one of the most linear levels in the game, and wouldn't you know it, it's another one of those levels that was added with Thief Gold. At first, I kind of liked it. You basically have to go into an elemental tower so that you can get a key to go into the next elemental tower. Playing through this level the first time, it was okay. At the very least, the towers all had kind of their own unique puzzle tied to them. But even while I was playing this level, I knew that I would never want to replay it. It kind of goes against the entire design philosophy of this game to this point. Like usually you'll have multiple ways of tackling the same objective, but not in this level, man. In this level, you got to go through every single one of these stupid towers, and it's just filled with enemies. I don't know what to tell you, man. I just really didn't like this level. It left a very bad taste in my mouth. Guess I should mention the very reason we're going to all of these different levels is we're trying to get a bunch of talismans that'll allow us to access the cathedral where that secret dark item was. Moving on to the Lost City. This one was actually a banger. You start out in the city and then you end up going down into a deep cave and everything's all fire themed. Right away, the level shows you the fire talisman. It's a great way of teasing you and showing you, hey, there's the treasure that you came here for. It's almost in your grasp. You just gotta go through a bunch of trials so that you can get to it. This area is more so about like climbing around and avoiding enemies. Up to this point, I pretty much just killed anything that got in my way, but since we're dealing with elemental fire beings, there's not really much you can do. Anyways, eventually you end up getting the talisman, and then for whatever stupid reason, it gives you the objective to leave the level. Again, I want to remind you, I really liked the idea that once you complete the objective, it would just be like, hey, mission done. Because going backwards through the map was just not super interesting to me. Since this game is so old, it didn't have the philosophy of Skyrim, where suddenly there's an exit. No, instead, you literally just have to backtrack. The next level, Song of Caverns, was the final level added with the Thief Gold version. I think that this might actually be my favorite level in the game. You start out in the city, you go down into some caves, see some weird crab people, climb out of the caves, and break into the opera house. There's a lot of citizens to deal with and a lot of guards as well. Overall, it's just a great time. The next mission is also a banger, which is Undercover. Honestly, I didn't expect to see something like this in this game. So basically, there's this faction called the Hammerites, which is essentially like a Templar. We've disguised as one of them, go into one of their compounds, and we're tasked with like finding one of the talismans. And because this is a good video game, it's not an instant mission failure if you end up getting caught, which was good for me because I slowly systematically knocked every guard out. I wanted to be able to explore the level without having to worry about being caught. But while I appreciated how straightforward the level itself was, the missions were ungodly stupid. There was actually a bunch of hidden switches around the map, and as soon as you activated the first switch, you had 5 minutes to activate the rest of them. I don't know how you would normally complete this without looking it up on the internet, outside of just wandering around the level and systematically finding all of them. Now that would have already been annoying enough, but even when you end up getting access to the talisman, you're not done yet. You have to read this random paper while being close enough to the talisman to remove the barrier around it so you can pick it up. This is stupid. But now we finally have all of the talismans, which means we can return to the cathedral. And this level was, it was good. You're dealing with a lot of undead ghosts, and the level itself kind of tasks you with a bunch of very, very strange objectives. Honestly, this level was kind of spooky because the enemies that you're dealing with in this area are super strong. Typical of Thief, what seems like a simple mission at first suddenly becomes a lot more complicated as you come across this spirit who gives you a bunch of extra quests. He basically forces you to go into buildings that you wouldn't otherwise want to go into because they're filled with undead. Anyway, once you collect all of his bones or something, eventually you just exorcise him. But that's actually not the end of the objective, because now you're tasked with finding a room that up to this point I hadn't found yet. But going back into the Cathedral, I noticed there was a bunch of upper levels that I hadn't explored, and sure enough, that's where you end up finding the explosive, which is required to get out of the level. Thank God for quick saving, because the first time it didn't work. And now we're on to the final 3 levels, which were my least favorite in the entire game. However, this is where the story picks up though, because suddenly you realize that old dude that had you going around the city gathering all the talismans, yeah, he's basically the devil and you just helped him with his master plan. Your character is essentially left for dead, but you get saved last minute. The level itself, it kind of sucks. There are way too many enemies in this map. So much so that I kind of just started avoiding combat and running as fast as I could through all of the areas. It's pretty straightforward, you just gotta get out alive. Another reason why I wasn't the biggest fan of this level is it was actually a revisit of the mansion that had the sword. And then the next level was a revisit of the Undercover Hammerite compound. This is something very common in like older video games where they pad it out by just kind of rehashing old levels. But yeah, I'll admit I didn't really have much tolerance for these just because it was the same map just with a bunch of new enemies sprinkled in. On one hand, it meant that I was familiarized with the level, but it just, I don't know, it didn't do it for me. You do, however, ended up going into the underground catacombs. Some Hammerites are down there and basically say, hey, can you end up getting the body of like our leader or something? You find him in a room with all these rat dudes, which I slowly killed because I'm stupid. Go down a raft, and then you're supposed to just leave the body in front of this window, but the game, again, is very unclear about this. So I spent like 30 minutes trying to figure out just where the hell I was supposed to plant this body. And now we're on to the final level, which, is extremely forgettable. We're essentially going into the devil's domain. We entered this weird portal and the level itself is extremely easy. You basically just have to get to the area where you can complete the main objective, and there's all of these enemies kind of in your way. Thankfully, because it's not super tight corridors, you can kind of just run for it. Again, it's extremely linear, and honestly, I don't see myself replaying through this level ever again just because it wasn't very fun. The final confrontation, which I actually kind of enjoyed, is you basically got the devil dude who's activating all of these talismans, and if he activates all of them, it's game over. All you have to do is sneak into the center without getting caught and do a little switcheroo with like the key item in the middle. Then you just wait for him to finish the ritual and boom, he's dead. Roll in credits. And that's my experience with Thief Gold. Honestly, I really enjoyed the game overall. I can give it a lot of slack just because of how old it is, but I was surprised at how well it held up today. Now you might be asking, why did you even play this game in the first place? Well, honestly, because there's a modded campaign called The Black Parade that I wanted to play through. But I thought that I would take the opportunity to kind of get the hang of the base game first. And it was something that was always kind of on my bucket list. We'll have another video talking about the Black Parade because I'm still playing through it, but my God, it's amazing so far. In the end, I really enjoyed my time with this one. And even though there was some levels I didn't like, the majority of them were really good. This is my first time doing one of these types of videos where I just kind of run you guys through my entire playthrough, and I've always wanted to do a video like this. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider liking it or subscribing for more. I do plan on doing more videos like this, but they're still gonna be very uncommon.